This is where the Clallam people were created. Creator bathed us there. So we are from this river, and it's not just a river to us, it's our very life.
We want our dammed salmon back, D-A-M-M-E-D. My grandfather was a child when the dams were built. He was one of the last of the Clallams to see the Elwha River at full production.
I've gone up and down this river just about every year since I was a kid. The only thing I remember really about seeing the river the first time is that I was afraid I was going to fall off my dad's back. I was in a backpack. It's pretty intense to be up here working on this project just because this is the river that made me want to be a scientist in the first place. I essentially have a front row seat to the rebirth of the Elwha River.
A river is a life-giving place, nurturing ecosystems and civilizations. What's a river for? It's people who decide. This is a story about one such place.
Good morning and welcome to Olympic National Park and former Lake Aldwell. For those of you who have not been down here before, right where my finger's at is where we are at. So you can imagine if we had been here, 5 years ago, for example, we would be underwater swimming.
In the far northwest corner of the country, snow-crowned peaks launch a chorus of streams and tributaries. They assemble into a river called the Elwha. The main stem runs 45 miles through Olympic National Park and the home of the Clallam people, and past two dams built near Port Angeles, Washington by a Canadian businessman.
Thomas Aldwell was clearly a character, kind of a larger-than-life figure. We would describe him today as a promoter, as a booster. 100 years ago, Thomas Aldwell and the pioneers, who subdued the wilderness, conquering the last frontier, as he titled his autobiography, saw the value in the transformation of the wild.
Port Angeles, when he came in the 1890s, was a little frontier town. He was a man of vision, no question about it. Again, a holy fire inside this guy. And he went out and looked around the mountains, and he started thinking, we dammed this, we brought the power into Port Angeles, we could have mills, we could have lights 24 hours a day.
The culture and the society viewed this new technology called electricity as a means to an easier lifestyle. The motive was obviously to produce power, but there was also motive to produce a profit, and that was really the foundation of what built this little empire here.
In the wilderness waters of a steep basalt gorge, workers completed the broad-shouldered Elwha Dam in 1913, and a 210-foot-tall Glines Canyon Dam in 1927.
They not only had the adversity and challenges of old technology, but they had inclement weather. The roads and access down into here were very difficult, and they had to take an incredible risk to build this project.
Suddenly, the Elwha was no longer a wild stream crashing down to the strait. The Elwha was peace and power and civilization.
My name is Adeline Smith. Shashko is my native name. I was raised by the Elwha River. The king salmon was, I don't know how tall I was, but it was just as tall as me. We were prepared to eat any time we got hungry. My brother used to have a salt shaker hooked down the side of his trousers,
For millennia, the reliable abundance of fish from the river fueled a civilization.
The Elwha were one of the most sophisticated and complex hunter-gatherer cultures in the world. If you have full-time artists, then you're not having trouble feeding people and you're not having trouble keeping a roof over people's heads because they can afford to do that art.
As Europeans arrived, their diseases decimated the native population. For those who remained, a new crisis emerged.
My elders used to sit by the river and talk about how the dams was going to destroy the fish.
And we watch the salmon. They struggle. They come up to the base of the dam and power plant down there, and they want to come upstream, and they want to do what they were designed to do.
And you could literally see them try and get past Elwha Dam, trying to get upstream to spawn where they historically used to go.
Salmon were prevented from reaching 90% of their habitats. In a river that once generated 400,000 fish a year, numbers plunged to about 3,000. Some species were added to the endangered list.
There's no question that time had sort of caught up to these dams. You know, what's the price that's been paid for putting these dams in? People started thinking about that. I found stories back in 1976 that this newspaper did. We could fill up Lake Aldwell with our stories, I think.
Elwha Dam had never been federally licensed to operate. Glines was due for renewal.
We were going to have to spend a tremendous amount of money on doing the things that were going to be necessary to get the projects relicensed. We were going to have to provide fish passage, which is extremely expensive. You come to the realization, we can't afford this for the size of these projects.
The small amount of energy they produced was enough in the early 20th century, but a fraction of what a single modern mill needed. And just above the dams, a one-of-a-kind opportunity awaited. Olympic National Park, established in 1938 for its special values to the American people, held nearly all of the Elwha River in pristine condition, but idling and impoverished without its salmon.
We put everybody in a room and began to negotiate what were people's problems and how could we overcome those problems. You know, you pass a law on taxes. Well, you know, taxes come and go. You return a river to being a wild and free-flowing salmon stream that lasts forever. Nobody's going to repeal that. Nobody's going to build another dam here once these dams come down, that's for sure.
This is the largest dam removal ever attempted in American history. After nearly 2 decades of planning, negotiation, and funding, a $325 million restoration project. Will it work? It begins with an ending.
Okay, now we're going to shut generator 2 down. Generator 2 offline. It's kind of like saying goodbye to an old friend. We are shutting everything off in one day. And to do that, there needs to be a specific sequence because most of the stuff here is manual. It's not automatic. Okay, we're bringing the load down right now. You guys ready?
Here we go, John.
Okay, 9:19. Elwha is put to bed.
Hundreds arrive from around the country to celebrate. Tribal members, officials, political leaders, river advocates, and a parade of cameras.
So this is truly a historic event, the largest dam removal in the United States.
It's something that our children won't ever forget, and our elders are here to witness it.
This is a story of persistence. It's a story of resilience, of people, of those fish that are waiting right down below the dam.
excavators lean into the first bites of an 80,000-ton concrete meal. The start of a step-by-step process. At Lower Elwha, once spill gates are gone, workers push the river from one side to the other, creating dry access. A demo team blasts temporary passage into bedrock, draining Lake Aldwell by half. After they demolish a 4-story concrete plug, the Elwha returns to its original channel. The temporary passage is filled, and the site is restored. At Glines Canyon Dam, contractors on a floating barge hammer away at the 21-story monolith, draining Lake Mills in stages. When the lake level is too low for maneuvering the barge, a series of blasts shatters remaining concrete for removal.
When we looked at how to take these dams out, the structures themselves are pretty straightforward. The big issue was, what do you do with all that sediment?
The dams hold back what erodes from the mountains. Enough sand, gravel, and stone to fill the Empire State Building about 18 times. Physical removal? Too costly and impractical. Planners decided to let the river do the work.
What's the depth rating right here? The way that we have the boat set up today is to monitor the elevations of the channel and the position of it. We expect that a lot of things will change once the sediment from the reservoirs is released and starts moving downstream. The dams have been storing all of that sediment up into the reservoir pools, and none of that's been allowed to come down into the rivers and make the wonderful habitat that we need for the fish.
This is essentially a giant supply of salmon habitat just waiting to work its way downstream.
Below the dams, the river is starved of the material salmon need to build their nests, called redds, for spawning.
And the beaches themselves are almost entirely all cobbles. There's no longer any clams or marine life on the beaches because of the lack of sediment transport.
But project managers face a dilemma. About half of the sediment is tiny particles. Too much at the wrong time would be a suffocating danger to fish.
Well, we basically can only control the amount of sediment being released while the dams are in place.
How can we allow the river to erode that material downstream while protecting the fish that we need to restore?
Years of research provided the answer. A 36-month effort to remove each dam from the top down in stages, with pauses for salmon migration and time for the river to digest the sediment, moving it gradually towards the coast.
Water does not like being impounded. Water's purpose is to erode the planet to the oceans.
At the lower dam, demolition experts prepare to nudge that process with about 8,000 pounds of high explosives.
We can't break the laws of physics. We just try to bend them to our will. We have to shoot a channel about 30 feet deep in order to divert the river. This shot's designed to break the rock without throwing it. We're trying to scramble a bunch of eggs here without making a big mess.
About 8 miles upriver, Glines Canyon Dam is newer, stronger, and more resistant to removal.
The dam is not coming down without a fight, but we're winning.
In the tight vise of the canyon, crews employ a pneumatic hammer from a barge tucked against the lip of the dam.
This is the coolest job I've ever had. Because you're sitting on a waterfall, literally. I mean, one step and you're on top of it, and 2 steps you're over it, and you're hammering on what's saving your life. It plays little mind tricks with you.
The barge is kept safely in place with a pair of steel columns extending 20 feet below the waterline.
You're doing it by braille. Everything's underwater. All you're looking at is water going over the waterfall, and you're chipping the dam out underneath it. And every day you can see the lake behind you. It went down 3 to 6 inches, foot some days.
As the dams grow smaller, the reservoirs behind them are also in retreat.
What we're standing on now is essentially the area that was about 30 feet underwater when the lake was at full pool, and we're standing on between 6 inches and a foot of fine sediment that was deposited as the reservoir was drawn down. This whole surface is a rapidly evolving landscape, and every movement of the river uncovers something that you haven't seen before.
An emerging forest of stumps reveals the work of loggers and hand tools.
This is one of the big floodplain cedars that was cut down to make way for the reservoir. You can see the steps that they cut to get up to their springboard notches there.
Wonders unveiled, like the evidence of 2,000-year-old trees removed a century ago, will soon be hidden again.
It's pretty amazing how fast the plants are growing on the reservoir. We have waist-high alders and willows already. Next year, these will be above my head. This moss is pretty much always the first thing that you see growing, and then the seeds take hold in the little microclimate that creates.
Scientists are also sowing seeds for one of the largest restoration efforts in Park Service history.
We're doing a lot of things really just to try to get nature kick-started. Over the 7 years that we'll be doing this project, we'll be installing more than 400,000 plants. The seeds come from the Elwha. Some of the plants take up to 2 to 3 years before they're ready to be outplanted.
Volunteers help these green shoots reclaim over a square mile of the most unforgiving lands, suffocated by reservoirs and transformed to barren moonscape.
You don't have developed soils, you don't have any living vegetation, you don't have any biological legacies.
Crews test dozens of native species in search of resilient pioneers that can take root as a major restoration milestone approaches. The lower dam is nearly gone, but for a last plug of rocks and concrete that crews peel away from the Elwha's path. On this festive 4th of July, the river's renewal is another reason for celebration.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, something that most of us never thought we would see.
I think one of the hardest things for people is to imagine a world that's different than it is right now. All the big decisions, all the big political and economic decisions which fundamentally drive our culture arise from natural resource issues.
Bruce Brown's book, published in 1981, inspired people to reconsider the Elwha River.
The community of Port Angeles made its decisions 100 years ago on the dams based on the belief systems that were current then, and based on the knowledge that they had then. Our belief systems are different, and I find that gratifying. I think it's crucial, not just here, but for this country as a whole.
Bruce hasn't had a reason to return for more than 3 decades, until now.
The sound of flowing water is clearly audible from here. Wow. What a sight. The thing I have never seen in my life is a free-flowing river above the dam. And there it is. I think that's one thing you can see written on this river. A change that is born of changing circumstances and information that has been learned over the last century. Things we know now that we didn't know before.
Transformation is also happening below the waterline as fish venture past the vanished footprint of the lower dam.
One of the major questions attached to dam removal is how many adult salmon will return to the Elwha. So we're using sonar, and it's counting the number of adult, specifically steelhead and chinook that are swimming up the river. You can think of it kind of like a flashlight of sound going into the river, except it's actually 96 flashlights highly focused. So we get sort of movie-like imagery, if you will, of these fish swimming by. The next time Chinook salmon enter the river, they'll have access to the entire watershed. They'll be able to swim right through glines and recolonize the entire river the way it was historically over 100 years ago.
Elwha Chinook were among the largest of their kind in the world, up to 100 pounds. Like all salmon, they begin life nested in river gravel. Fragile eggs, thrumming hearts. Young fish make for the Pacific tails first and eyes upstream, as if to memorize the way back. Their bodies endure profound changes as they move from freshwater to salty ocean, where they gain most of their weight before coming home to spawn and replenish a hungry watershed.
That's what we're waiting for. That's what we've been waiting for lifetimes for. That's what everybody's been excited about to see in this whole project.
Scientists expect salmon's return to the Elwha's far reaches will jumpstart the health of its entire ecosystem.
There were bears, there were eagles, there were all these critters using this watershed when the salmon went all the way to the headwaters.
Salmon are a keystone species. There's studies from the Pacific Northwest that show dozens of different animals that use them. They are the fundamental building blocks of the ecosystem. And on Elwha, when that was taken away, that's when the ecosystem started to crash.
Our children are going to see a very different Elwha River than what we see right now.
As a demo crew places the last charges into what's left of Glines Canyon Dam, park visitors are a safe distance away to enjoy the making of history.
And today is the day that they're doing the final blast. So this is a really exciting day. I'm really happy that you guys are out sharing this experience. Take a moment and stop and listen to this amazing sound of this beautiful river flowing, because it is the first time in 100 years that you can hear the Elwha River free flowing.
We had our last blast on Glines Canyon Dam, and so we've essentially opened up the river for whatever wants to come up.
The river's biggest and most celebrated fish are back already, laying eggs for the next generation. Just around the bend from what, days before, was the base of Glines.
Today we are doing a spawner survey of this section of the river. We can hear fish excavating their redds. You can hear the splashing as they're moving the gravels.
It's really inspiring and humbling to really recognize the power the river has in its own course and in its own meaning.
In the next 50 years, there's going to be a brand new forest growing up, new paths for water finding its way off the hill slopes into the river, new places for salmon to spawn. And that's going to keep me busy just watching the river change for the rest of my life.
The waters are different, they're free waters. And the salmon will be able to smell the sweet, fresh water that comes from this river and will follow it and know, that they can go all the way to the top.
All of a sudden, you're at the headwaters, and it's waterfalls and springs coming down the mountainside. You have to go up and look at. It's hard to tell you how beautiful it is.
And I can take any person in America and bring them out here to let them stand along the Elwha and get a sense of a deeper current of life, the natural and the perpetual and the forever.
What's the river for? It's freedom. Having the river itself be free as what we're listening to today.